Click, clack. The mechanical rhythm of the keyboard was the only heartbeat in the room. Olivia stared at the screen, her fingers moving in a practiced, mindless dance across the keys. Process, file, submit, repeat. The air in the office was recycled, thick with the smell of dry paper and overheated plastic. She glanced at the clock on the wall. The second hand ticked forward with agonizing deliberation, each movement shaving another sliver off her day. She reached for the next stack of forms, the edges of the paper sharp against her skin. There was no joy in the precision, only the weight of a process that never ended. She leaned back, the chair groaning under her slight shift in weight, and looked at the rows of identical gray walls stretching into the distance. Everyone around her was moving, yet no one was going anywhere. She looked down at her hands. They were steady, capable, and currently tethered to a machine that processed numbers instead of dreams. A quiet tension tightened in her chest, a physical need to break the cycle. She stood up, grabbed her bag, and walked toward the exit, needing to find a space where the air felt real again. The door swung open, and the scent of roasted beans replaced the stale office air. Olivia found a corner table, tucked away from the main flow. She did not open a book. She watched. A student sat opposite a stranger, fingers moving rapidly over a notebook, their conversation a blurred rhythm of ideas. At the center table, two entrepreneurs pressed pens into a napkin, mapping out a business model with sharp, aggressive lines. She watched the ink bleed into the paper. The steam from her cup rose in a thin, swirling column, diffusing into the light. She traced the rim of the mug, feeling the heat radiate through her fingertips. The room was alive with the friction of intent. She leaned in, listening to the hum of the machine, the clatter of porcelain, and the overlapping voices of people building something from nothing. The stagnation of the office fell away, replaced by a sharp, clear focus. She looked at the napkin, then at the empty space beside her. She whispered to herself, "I will build a place where these sparks turn into fire." The vow was quiet, but it landed with the weight of an anchor. She watched the room for one more minute, memorizing the rhythm of the space, before she stood up to leave. The office lights were barely cold before the kitchen table became her new workspace. Olivia pushed aside the remains of a quick dinner and cleared a space on the wood. She pulled out a notebook, the spine cracked and worn. She did not sleep. She mapped. Her pen moved across the pages, tracing floor plans until the graphite smudged under her palm. She calculated shipping weights, itemized supply chains, and drafted customer service protocols that covered every possible mistake. The house was silent, save for the rhythmic scratching of her pen and the occasional hum of the refrigerator. Her back ached, and her eyes burned from the harsh glare of the desk lamp, but she did not stop. She reached for a cup of coffee, found it cold, and ignored it. She was building an infrastructure on paper, turning vague ambitions into a rigid, functional sequence of events. She sketched the placement of every outlet, the flow of the counter, and the precise timing of a drink order. Every page she filled was a stake driven into the ground. By the time the sky outside her window turned from ink black to a bruised, pre-dawn gray, her hands were stained with ink. But the plan was complete. She closed the notebook, the thud echoing in the quiet room, and looked at the stack of pages. The dream was no longer an idea. It was a manual. The keys turned in the lock for the first time, and the shop opened to the morning sun. Olivia stood behind the counter, waiting for the first order. It did not take long for the machine to reveal its flaws. A sharp, high-pitched hiss cut through the quiet, followed by a steady drip of water pooling onto the floorboards. She reached for the lever, but the pressure gauge needle jumped and then went limp. The machine leaked, a dark stain spreading across the counter surface. She grabbed a towel to mop the water, but the front door chime rang again. It was not a customer. An envelope slid under the door, the thick paper marked with a red stamp. She tore it open. The rent bill. She checked the ledger, then the bank register, and the numbers stared back at her, a total that had plummeted to double digits in less than a week. The machine hissed again. A sputtering, mechanical cough that filled the room. She stood still, watching the water drip from the nozzle, the sound rhythmic and persistent. The vision of the shop she had sketched in her notebook felt worlds away from the reality of the leaking pipe and the stack of unpaid invoices on the counter. The air in the room was heavy with the smell of damp wood and stagnant water. A heavy knock rattled the front glass. The landlord stood on the sidewalk, his shadow stretching across the floor. He did not enter. He tapped his watch, pointed at the door, and mouthed a single word: payment. Olivia looked away, her gaze falling on the bank statement. The digits were stagnant, a flat line of two-figure numbers. The door chime signaled again, but it was not a customer. 3 friends stepped inside, their eyes scanning the leaking machine and the damp floor. One of them pulled a chair out, the legs scraping harshly against the wood. They spoke in low, measured tones. "You have a job waiting at the firm," one said, sliding a business card onto the counter. "Cut the losses now. You are burning through everything you saved." They spoke of security, of stable hours, and of the inevitable failure of a venture that could not cover its own rent. Olivia watched them. She watched the way they avoided looking at the blueprints still taped to the wall. The room felt smaller with them in it, the air thick with their logic. They waited for an answer, their silence demanding a surrender. She felt the weight of their gaze, the pressure of the bills in her pocket, and the absolute stillness of the empty shop. She did not speak. She simply turned and faced the silent, broken machine. The door clicked shut behind them, cutting off the city noise. Olivia remained behind the counter, staring at the chairs. They were empty, every one of them. She looked at the wooden table near the window, a dark water ring scarring the surface. She walked around the counter, pulled a rag from her apron, and pressed it into the wood. She began to wipe, back and forth. The movement was slow, deliberate, and rhythmic. She pressed down until her knuckles turned white. She did not look at the empty chairs. She did not look at the stack of unpaid bills. She focused only on the grain of the timber beneath the cloth. She wiped the same spot again, watching the dull, water-stained surface give way to a deep, polished glow. She moved to the next table, then the next. The scraping of wood against the floor ceased as she aligned every chair to face the center of the room. She stood in the middle of the shop, the rag held tight in her fist. The silence was no longer a weight, it was a blank canvas. She adjusted the angle of a single chair, stepped back, and looked at the gleam of the wood. It was clean. It was ready. She turned toward the machine, her eyes fixed on the task ahead. Olivia moved to the wall and dimmed the main lights, leaving only the warmth of the small lamps near the tables. She tapped the player, and a low, steady melody filled the corners of the room, replacing the hollow silence. She stood by the door, waiting. 10 minutes passed. Then, a man stepped inside, shaking rain from his coat. He looked at the empty chairs, hesitated, and turned to leave. Olivia stepped forward. "The coffee is fresh," she said, her voice steady. She did not rush. She walked to the machine, her movements precise, and poured a cup. She placed it on the polished table she had wiped clean. She did not offer a sales pitch. She offered a space. The man sat. He took a sip, looked at the lamp, and opened a book. 5 minutes later, 2 more people entered, drawn by the light through the glass. Olivia greeted them with the same focused attention. She curated the environment for each person, adjusting the chair, shifting the lamp, ensuring the atmosphere held the same quality for 3 as it would for 30. The register clicked. A coin dropped into the metal drawer. It was the first real profit. She held the small amount in her hand, feeling the weight of the metal, and knew the turning point had arrived. The first profit did not go toward a new coat or an easier life. Olivia walked into a warehouse and pointed to a heavy, industrial-grade grinder, its steel frame gleaming under the fluorescent lights. She paid for it in full, watching her balance drop, but the quality of the extraction improved with the very next cup. She kept the pace. When the second shop opened across town, she did not hire a manager to oversee the numbers. She spent 2 weeks behind the counter with a new hire, showing him how to calibrate the grind, how to wipe the steam wand, and how to greet a customer with the same focus she had cultivated in the first space. She taught him the rhythm. She watched him replicate the atmosphere, adjusting the lamps and the music just as she would have done. He became the first of many. She moved from shop to shop, refining the protocol, ensuring every barista understood that the mission was not just about the drink, but the consistency of the experience. By the 3rd year, the brand spanned the city. By the 5th, it reached the neighboring districts. Olivia stood in the center of her newest location, watching a barista train a recruit, and saw her own hands, her own movements, and her own focus reflected in the labor of others. The foundation was set. 10 years had passed since the first cup was poured. Olivia sat in a glass-walled office, the quiet hum of the city rising from the streets below. A journalist sat across from her, holding a digital recorder. He gestured to a small, framed photograph hanging on the wall behind her desk. It showed a rusted, dented espresso machine, its steam wand crooked and its base stained with dark rings. That machine was the beginning of everything, the journalist said. Olivia turned her chair to face the frame. She reached out and traced the edge of the wood with her index finger, feeling the texture of the grain. She remembered the sound of the steam escaping from the side, the way it leaked onto the counter, and the constant, desperate pressure of those early days. It was a machine that had failed 100 times in 100 different ways. She looked back at the journalist, her expression fixed and steady. "The hardware failed," she said, "but my purpose never flickered." She did not look away. She sat with the memory, acknowledging the weight of the machine and the relentless effort required to turn that broken piece of equipment into the foundation of a national presence. The room remained still, the silence punctuated only by the distant traffic of a city built on her choices. The interview concluded with the soft click of a door closing. Olivia stood alone in the silence of her office. She walked toward the floor-to-ceiling glass that separated her from the city. Below, the sidewalks were veins of constant motion. She watched the people, noting the way they gathered in groups, the way they moved in pairs, and the steady stream of individuals crossing the threshold into her storefronts. They were not merely seeking caffeine. They were seeking the space she had carved out from the fragments of her original plan. Every person entering a shop represented a choice she had made over the last decade. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, feeling the vibration of the city rising through the steel frame of the building. Her legacy was not a balance sheet or a count of locations. It was the hum of conversation in 100 rooms, the friction of ideas meeting on napkins, and the quiet sparks turning into light. She had started with one small leaking machine and ended with a network of human contact that spanned the horizon. She watched the crowds until the sun dipped low, her gaze anchored to the movement of the people, satisfied by the living, breathing result of her singular, unyielding vision.